Hi, welcome back to another episode of Coldstream Rod Shop. I'm Derek Fraser. In this week's video, we want to finish off putting the 33 front end together. Last week we bent the spindle arms, bent the F1 upper shock mounts, adjusted the panhard bar, and then welded the unisteer in place. Normally I can do this in 2 weeks, but unfortunately we had a couple extras we had to do in this case and kind of combined a few parts that we hadn't combined before, so that led to some clearance and geometry issues, but I think now we've got everything solved. So last week I needed to have this reamer. It's a 7-degree reamer for reaming out the tie rod end holes. When I bent the steering arms, it basically kind of deformed the holes a little bit, so we cleaned the holes out. Now I just have to ream them out. Once I do that, I'm going to take the spindle arms back off, the shocks, the upper shock mounts, and we're going to get a fresh coat of paint onto them, get them cleaned up and stuff, and then put this back together again with all the springs into it, hopefully get the front wheels onto it, and then start looking into what we're going to do on the rear suspension, because the rear suspension is going to be, it's a little bit of a challenge for me because I haven't done it this way before, but it's a transverse leaf spring. We now want to use the 36 Ford split wishbones in the back. So got to get that set up, get the geometry set up, and trim those rods. So I'm going to start on that this week too. But the other thing, I've got to get a bunch of body work done on the, just touch-up work on the Camera Ladies 32 Roadster body, because like I said in the end of the last episode, I really want to get this into paint in the next 3 weeks or so before the cold weather hits, and then get it over on the chassis. And it also, that's one reason, it also frees up the whole shop here to do other stuff. So anyways, follow along as we work on 33 and a 32 Ford this week. So while the front end components are up there drying, I got the steering arms, the shock mounts, and the shocks. I painted them black. I'm going to put them back on the front end of the chassis. But while I'm doing that, I decided to start working on the rear end. Now, if those following will probably know that the plan for this is we're going to use a 1940 Ford style transverse rear leaf spring, one from Posey's that's set up for 32 to 34 Fords. It's a little bit narrower than the 40 Ford, but it's the same style of spring. We needed to have the spring perches 44.5 inches apart. So right now what I've done in order to get that going, I've set the rear end up. I have on the screen there, we've got 87.1, which is basically 3 degrees pinion angle. So what I've done, I've set the rear end up with a 3-degree pinion angle, because generally speaking, that's about where you're going to put your pinion angle and your transmission when you get in the chassis. As I've said previously, just so long as your pinion angle and your engine and driveline angle are the same, 2.5 and 2.5 or 3 and 3, then you're going to have a reduced possibility of having any kind of vibration in your drive shaft. So got to try and get them both the same. So normally what I do, I aim for 3 degrees and then adjust accordingly. So with that at 3 degrees, then what we wanted to do is get the spring hangers on here. So we've got the spring hangers on there with the little bubble level. So they're level with the floor. Everything is square. I've got the triangle there. It's square, tacked in place. We're 44.5 inches apart. Now, using the transverse leaf spring, we're going to also use split wishbones. So we're going to have to make brackets for those at some point. I'm not sure if it's going to be in this episode or not. We're going to see how it goes. We're going to get the spring and the spring perches going first. But we're also going to have to put lower shock mounts onto it as well. So there's going to be 3 different attachments on this rear end. So right now what I'm going to do is, since I'm happy with this, everything is still square, it didn't move, I'm going to finish welding everything. Now around the axle, I'm going to go from one side to the other and let it cool, because if it shouldn't distort much because we're welding far enough out to the end. Typically, if there's any kind of weld distortion,
especially like if you welded something here, you could get a lot more movement in the axle tube, but closer to the end, it's less probability of getting some distortion. But nevertheless, I'm not going to introduce a tremendous amount of heat to it. I'm just going to weld it a little bit of a time and let it cool. So we'll get those welded in place. Once I have it welded in place, I'm going to disassemble that spring. I'm only going to use the bottom spring to mount it in there, and then we're going to start trying to figure out where the split wishbones go. So there's the spring hangers fully welded in place, and like I said, I took apart the rear spring just so that I could actually, like, there's so much tension on it, I can't actually bend it to fit between the two spring hangers. So one technique is to, if you don't have a spring compressor of some sorts, I don't know if we have one for a flat spring like that, but just basically take the spring apart and then we'll reassemble it. But what we want to do is leave the spring apart right now so that I can simulate basically the spring under compression with the whole car on top of it. So right now with that in place, I don't have any locking nuts on the shackles. I just got some regular fine thread nuts on there to hold it in place. So what I'll do next is I'll go get my other jack and I'll take this and I'll position it in the frame and then start aligning it with the front and then trying to find out where we're going to attach the split wishbones, both on the axle and then also on the frame, because my suspicion is that they're going to be a little too long for the way that we've made the X member here. We might have to shorten them out just a little bit, but anyways, we're going to work our way through that and start getting the rear end put into the 33 frame. So the next step is to position a 9-inch Ford rear end in the chassis and start lining up where we want to put the split wishbones. I left all of the springs off, so we just have the main leaf onto it, so I can kind of simulate the compressed or close to ride height. I think with the springs into it, it's probably going to sit a little higher than that, even with the weight onto it, because there's a lot of springs and there is a lot of arc to those springs. So I kind of suspect once I load it up with those springs, she's gonna even with all the weight onto it, it's going to sit a little bit higher than what we see right now. Right now I've got it clamped in place. I've got the pinion angle set at like just under 3 degrees. So it's, I think 2.85 degrees on the pinion angle. So that's close enough for what we're doing right now. So I'm going to lay out where these split wishbones will be. So obviously you can see that they're going to be really too long. So going to have a conversation with the gentleman that owns this. What he wants me to do is to cut off the spring perches and then bob these up and then put some urethane bush ends onto it and then have them connected at the center, kind of like what they do with like a ladder bar style rear suspension. I'm thinking that we're probably going to need a panhard bar in the back on this, although I've seen people run them with and without them with this kind of setup. I think there's more now that are using a panhard bar with a transverse leaf spring in the back, but like I said, I've seen lots of them without it with a dual ladder bar system. So anyways, going to have the conversation, going to talk about where we cut them off at, and then where we weld them onto the rear axle. Now the one thing I do have is I have an original 36 rear end over here, and I actually thought we had the brackets onto it that I could copy, but that looks like this is the military one, so it does not have the wishbone brackets on it like I was hoping. So we're gonna have to make some up. Gotta get some cardboard and we'll mock up a little bracket here for these because the brackets are going to be coming on the axle on an angle. So we'll just play around with some cardboard and make something up and then hopefully cut it out with a plasma cutter. Well, tonight I decided to put most of the front end back together again. I know this is probably the third or fourth episode we've been working on the front end on this 33, but it presented a couple different scenarios that we hadn't worked on before, mainly the split wishbones, and then the issue was dropping the spindle arms. But like right now, I think we've got all the clearance we need. I did not put all of the springs in the front spring because right now I want the frame sitting at close to ride height so that I can keep working on the rear axle and kind of have that set up for ride height. Now you're probably thinking, what the heck have I got that piece of masking tape there for? One thing that's come up quite a few times, a lot of folks have reached out to me and they've asked me, have you considered something called the Ackerman angle or Ackerman principle as far as, when you bend the steering arms? Now, the one thing, when I bent the steering arms, I did not change this angle of the steering arm. What happened was the steering arm, this angle that the steering arm is on, I actually just dropped it straight down. So the only thing that actually happened with it was the location of the tie rod end is now lower. And because it's lower, it's actually physically closer that direction towards the kingpin. So what's happened actually, we've got a better turning radius. Now, one thing I've noticed when I put a unisteer in is that typically you don't have as good of a turning radius as I find if you had a Vega steering box. I like them a lot because they're super tight. There's no play in the steering wheel. I personally prefer it over using the Vegas, but also if you've got a tight Vega box, it's not that bad either. So anyways, I guess the point of putting the masking tape up is with the Ackerman principle or angle for the front end. The general rule of thumb is that if you can take a wire, a piece of string or something straight, you take it between the center of the rear cross member and you do it straight up. And what happens is your kingpin, the tie rod end, and this point should be in a straight line. And for all, put the camera there, for all intents and purposes, I think that we're in a very straight line. As I said before, we didn't change this angle of the steering arm. I know sometimes people do, but when I was bending them, I bent it down and in so that I actually could lower where the tie rod end was going on the steering arm. So I checked at the other side, but I left this side up just so that I could show that I did check this out. And I certainly appreciate everybody that reached out to me on YouTube and through instant messages and private messages to remind me of that. It's not something that we've done on this channel before as far as like bending steering arms, but other people have gotten in trouble with it before. There's lots of YouTube videos on it. So I kind of educated myself as a result of some positive feedback from folks. So now that I've got that set up, we are going to carry on with the rear end. I did get a set of shocks here. We cleaned out the upper mounts and basically kind of dummying in where we think it's going to go. The owner has a set of lower shock mounts that he's going to drop by to me. They were kind of rusty, so he got them sandblasted. He'll drop those off. And then tomorrow night, the plan is to, God forbid, on some of these, some people might get upset with me, but I'm going to cut these arms off here because they won't fit with the setup we have. And then we're going to make some brackets here so that the bracket will fit on the 9-inch Ford rear end. On the camera ladies body, I have been picking away at this. Like I said, I'll just show you what we're up to. Got to have most of the firewall almost finished sanded. I got to finish sand this corner, but the plan for this episode is I want to have that whole firewall completely done. It's the biggest amount of sanding and body fill that we have to do on the entire body. And then what I got to do after that, as I've said, I've just got a couple little places where we work stuff and fix stuff. We'll do a little bit of touch up there. But anyways, we're going to carry on with that. I'll show you what I do as I go. But otherwise, we're going to keep pushing ahead on the 33 chassis here. So I started my night with a little bit of anxiety still about cutting off these perfectly good 36 wishbones, cutting the spring hanger off. But at the end of the day, the gentleman that owns this, he has quite a few pairs of these, so not so much of an issue for him. So what he still wanted me to do is go forward with using these split wishbones and then mounting them to the 9-inch forward axle, rear axle here. So what I did to start, I started off with a little paper pattern here. So made it fit inside of here first. And then secondly, I used one of these little tools, a finger tool or whatever. I took that, pushed it up on an angle here on the axle, which gave me the shape for the top here, which I traced out. Once I had that, of course, then I can check and make sure that it fits pretty decently here right now, so it's a good pattern. And then traced it out on a 1/2-inch piece of steel. Now, debated a few different ways of cutting this out, and you can probably guess by the looks of things, I decided to go with the plasma cutter. Probably could have hole sawed this out and then hacked it away with a whole bunch of mini grinder wheels and cut-off wheels and everything else to get the shape. But we're going to give it a try with the doing it this way with the plasma cutter. Got it quite a while ago, haven't used it a whole lot, and basically did some freehand stuff here, made sure I left a little bit of extra room. Right now it's pretty toasty, so what I'll do, I'll let that cool off and then I'll start dressing it. One left, one right. We'll dress it up and we'll drill the holes and we'll get them ready to mount on the back of the axle here. Well, hopefully you can see that. So I've cleaned up the outside edge of where I cut it with the plasma cutter, and I now currently have 1/2-inch holes drilled through here. I relieved this a little bit so it would fit around the axle, and for the moment I just have it dummied in place over here. That's approximately where I think it's going to fit. I would really like to have it further over, but unfortunately with the shock mounts already kind of decided where they're going to go, I think the lower shock mounts would go somewhere around there, which gives us about I think we want around a 25 to 30 degree angle on the shocks. Might be able to move these over just a little bit more, but we don't want to crowd them too much. So tentatively, that's kind of where I see the ladder bar or split wishbone mounts going on the back axle. The other thing, as I said before, they're too long. And what I read online is most of the time when you're making these long ladder bars, you would ideally like to have the pivot point up here kind of in line with where the universal joint would be for the transmission. That may be for ones with torque tubes or whatever, but I read that people suggested that's what we're going to do, so I think I'm going to stick with that. These are certainly long enough. We planned on shortening them anyways, so going to have to try and calculate where the universal joint is going to be, and then we'll get some ends here for this, and then we'll mount the bracket across. I'm going to carry on with cutting the mount off the back of the other one and kind of dummying the other one up and see where we sit. And then anyways, we're making progress on the ladder bars, split wishbones for the rear. So this is as far as we go this week. Would like to get a little further like always, but you just can go as far as you can go. So right now I have the two 1/2-inch, I think they're 1/2-inch. Quarter-inch thick, I think. Nope, 3/8-inch thick plates here for the brackets to go around the 9-inch forward rear end. Both of those, like I said or showed you earlier, I made out the paper cutout and then basically trimmed them so that they would fit on an angle. Paper cutout fits a lot easier around the axle than what a 3/8-inch thick piece of steel does. You kind of have to bevel the edges a little bit. So right now I've got those in place. I trimmed off the hangers off of the back of the
the wishbones. I'm sure that's not going to be a popular decision among some people, but that was the plan for what we wanted to do. If anybody has done it, I'm kind of curious as to how much you cut off the back of these. I didn't cut, probably I could cut a little bit more off to make it look a little neater, but I cut the minimum off for now. Now, I'm not going any further with this for two reasons. One, I need the lower shock mounts. They're not here yet. And then the second reason is we want to use the urethane bushing or bushed ends to go on the end of the rods over here. So what I have is a 5/8 thread. I've got an 11/16 bung, and what I ultimately want to use is 3/4 inch ones. So I'm going to wait on getting some 3/4. I think we need the 3/4 inch threads on the rear bars. I don't want to go with the 5/8. So once we get some of those 3/4 inch urethane ends, we'll work on the end of this. And then what I'll do is I'll get the rear end. The rear end is centered right now, but it's not level side to side. Once we get level side to side, we have these ends. Then I'll start tacking these brackets in place. So we're inching forward onto it, made some progress. We still got a little ways to go onto it, a few more things to do, make sure things are lined up. And yeah, the other thing I mentioned earlier about it, I do want to calculate where the drive shaft universal joint is going to be, and that's where I want to put the end of these on the end of these ladder bars or split wishbones, whatever you want to call it. The other thing I did manage to finish off was I did manage to put a couple more coats on the front of the firewall for the camera lady's Roadster. So I did get that sanded to where I wanted to get it done. That was probably one of the bigger areas I needed to sand. So now I'm going to be working my way back through. Hopefully I'll be able to get through it at a faster pace. But anyways, that's it for this week at Coldstream Rod Shop. We worked on the 33 Ford chassis, did a little body work on the 32 Roadster, and we got more to go next week. So please like, share, tag, and subscribe. Come on back next week and see what we're up to. Everybody have a great week and take care. Thanks.